so I am back and we are going to do sight reading part 2 now, where we actually take a look at some sounds and silences and music that's used in rhythm. Remember, we are just working on rhythm right now. If you are at the middle school, this may be brand new to you, and actually it may be brand new to you for a few of you in high school. So again, I'm going to review all the basics. Even if you know all this, this is a good review. You need to copy this down in your notes. This is the new part that I have up, and you're going to need to copy this, and I'm going to go over these right now. Remember, we are working towards a sight reading where eventually we're going to be using pitches, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, to sing melodies, okay? So, and the whole reason we do this, if I didn't say it in the first video, is it actually helps us to become better musicians, right? It is a challenge, and usually when I say, okay guys, we're gonna sight read, there is a collective grumble in the classroom. Everybody's like, oh, no, let's not sight read or sight sing. But it's good for us. When I was in high school choir, I hated the days that we did sight reading. But it makes us a better musician. If we can count and we can tell what those pitches are we're supposed to be singing, it helps us to become better musicians, okay? And that should be one of the reasons why we're in choir. Yes, we're in choir because we like to sing, but we also want to get better at our art, at our craft. So that's why sight reading is important. Okay, so we're going to start off with these notes. By the way, notes will always have some kind of a circle, okay? And they might have a stem on them as well, okay? These are rests, these are the silences. So notes show us the sound, rests show us silences, okay? So you need to make sure that you've gotten these in your notes. I'm going to go over these very quickly. If this is a high school student that you're watching this, very quickly, I am going to move on into eighth notes and other things, okay? Syncopated rhythms for one, where we have dotted notes and so forth, pretty quickly, okay? At middle school, we're gonna go a little bit slower. But for these first introductory videos, we're just gonna all be at the same basic level. So, we have what we call a whole note. It looks like this. You will need to memorize these, okay? So a whole note looks like this. It's going to get 4 beats of sound. And this is when we're talking about this kind of a meter signature, okay? A half note looks like a whole note, but it has a stem on it, okay? A half note gets 2 beats of sound. This is a quarter note. It's colored in. Quarter note. It gets 1 beat of sound. There are also silent equivalents or rest equivalents. There's also what we call a whole rest. It gets 4 beats of silence, okay? The reason why I have this here is because when you see it by itself, it looks like this. But when you see it on a staff, it's literally hanging from that 4th line, okay? A half rest is gonna get 2 beats of silence. Just like a half note gets 2 beats of sound, a half rest gets 2 beats of silence, okay? And notice that on a music staff, it is sitting on the 3rd line from the bottom. Okay, so these are always the ones that we get confused, okay? This is a quarter rest, and a quarter rest is basically the way I draw it. It's a Z with a C on the bottom. For those of you that are like, oh man, I can't ever copy that down. That's how I do that. I just do a little Z with a C on the bottom. This is a quarter rest. It gets 1 beat of silence. So again, rest shows silences, notes show sound. Now, what's really confusing is you would think that maybe a whole note gets 1 whole beat, or maybe a half note gets 1 whole beat. But that's not really how this is set up. The whole note is based on a notation system from several hundred years ago, where this is worth 4 beats. So it's a whole note, but it's worth 4 beats. The reason this is called a half note is because it's exactly half of the whole note, not because it's worth half of a beat. This is called a quarter note, okay? Not because it's worth a quarter of a beat or 1/4, but because it's worth 1/4 of your whole note. So these names are based on these notes' relationship to this note. The same thing here, okay? So those are where those names come from. So don't get confused that a half note is worth half of a beat. It's not. It's worth 2 because it's worth half of what a whole note is. So you will need to get these memorized. So what I suggest you do, pause the video, copy this down, and look over these, okay? And you're gonna need to know them because we are about to move into something called Sight Reading Factory. Now those of you that I had last year, we did some of that online, and we're gonna do it again this year. So we are about to move into that. I was waiting a few weeks before I introduced that. So that's coming, and you're gonna have to be able to do these kinds of things, okay? So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna plug in some of these notes into my measures. Now remember from the verse video that this means there can only be 4 beats of notes and rests in every measure, okay? So I am going to start out with a whole note. Remember, a whole note is worth 4 beats, so I can't put anything else in that measure because it fills it up. And this next measure, I'm gonna put 2 half notes because each one of them takes up 2 beats. 2 plus 2 equals 4. I can't put anything else in that measure. In this measure, I'm gonna put quarter notes. Each one of those quarters gets 1 beat. So I can only put 4 of them in that measure because remember our meter signature is telling us that. And the last measure, I am going to put a quarter note, a quarter rest, and a half note. And this is because that's what I came up with, but also because that fills up 4 beats, okay? This is 1 beat. The quarter rest is also a beat. Don't think that rests don't take up beats. They do. They just show us silence instead of sound. And then a half note gets 2. So that's where we get our 4 beats. Now in sight reading, what we have to learn is how to clap and perform this rhythm. So what we do is I'm going to write out the beats. I can write up to 4 beats in every measure, again, because this is my meter signature. So here we have, let's use a different color. Here we have our whole note, it gets 4 beats. So I'm gonna write out my 4 beats like this. I'm gonna write out all 4 beats, even though the whole note is falling on beat number 1. You always start with beat number 1 in a measure, always. Whatever is the first note or rest in a measure, it always falls on beat 1. No exception, okay? So we have 4 beats of sound. That note is starting on beat 1 and is being held through the 4th beat. In this measure, remember each one gets 2 counts. So this is gonna be beat 1 and beat 2. This is gonna be beat 3 and beat 4. 2 counts, 2 counts, okay? But I'm not writing 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm writing 1, 2, 3, 4 because each measure has to have 4 beats, okay? So the half note would be played on beat 1 and the sound is held out for 2 beats. The half note, the second half note is played on beat 3 and held out for 2 beats. I'm writing X's on the beats where the note will be played, okay? Here, this is beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. Because there's a note for every beat gets played. Every beat gets a sound, okay? Here, in the last measure, we have beat 1. The quarter rest falls on beat 2. You can't skip it because it's there. And then the half note takes up the last 2 beats of the measure, beats 3 and 4. So you're gonna have sound on beat 1. Are you gonna have any sound on beat 2? No, because it's a silence. It's filled up with silence. On beat 3, you're gonna have sound and it lasts through beat 4. Now I'm gonna go back and I'm going to circle my X's because I am gonna clap this rhythm and I want you to clap it with me. And I am going to clap where the X's are, okay? And I'm going to count at the same time. Here we go. I'm going to give you 4 beats to count off, and then you're going to clap with me. 1, 2, let's clap this rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, rest, 3, 4. Notice I clapped just where the X's are. Notice I clapped only on the beats where notes occurred, okay? I didn't clap on beat 2. I didn't clap on beat 4 because the sounds carried through that beat, okay? But if I were to clap on this beat, I would be indicating that there was another note here. And that's too many notes for this measure, okay? So you only clap on the beats where the notes first appear, okay? Also, notice that when I clap this rhythm, I did this for the rest. I've trained myself to do that, to put my hands up like this. That way, it's the opposite of clapping. A lot of us, when we're doing rhythms, will make the mistake of clapping on rest. But I've trained my brain to do this so that I don't clap on it. Okay, we're going to do it again. Clapping together. 1, 2, ready, and clap. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, rest, 3, 4. Okay? So, I'm going to end that now, and then probably the next thing I'm going to have you do is practice some more rhythms like this. But we're going to do it in Sight Reading Factory. And so I'll give you some lessons on how to get into Sight Reading Factory. You're going to have a special student code to do that because the school has purchased memberships into this account for you, Sight Reading Factory, and we're just going to practice some rhythms. So that's going to be the first assignment after doing this. Make sure you copy this down. I'm sure there are plenty places online that you can go to practice rhythms if you want to do that. But if you have any questions, please email me. Like I said with high school, we're going to move on to eighth notes very quickly and dotted notes very quickly. Middle school, we're going to stay about here, okay? In fact, if you are a middle schooler, we're probably only going to start out with rhythms using quarters and half notes to make things a little bit easier, okay? Okay, make sure you get this in your notes.